Welcome once again to Ottawa Today. Every Wednesday at this time, we welcome Elliot Tepper, Carleton University political science professor. And we always have so much to talk about in international news. We talk about the big stories that are happening around the world and how they impact Canada. We will get to our weekly chat about the U.S. election in a few minutes. But there is other news that's worth talking about first. Elliot, welcome. Thank you for being here once again.
Thank you, Mark. I made a big discovery. The world is round. I always make discoveries when I look at maps, but if you look at the big three stories that of the many to cover today, there's Syria. The collapse of that peace talk, we have to talk about that.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about the fact the world is gathering, or has just finished gathering, at the United Nations. And there's that big election, and the debate is next Monday night. Well, what's tying these stories together is there's kind of a human dimension to it all. And that human dimension are refugees and the movement of people. And suddenly, what had been an issue that's always been there in the background has snapped into focus. We talked earlier about there may be an inflection point in world politics after the G20 and then Lagarde. Suddenly it's the day of the dispossessed, the day that we can no longer say you can overlook those people affected by globalization. So, no, the masses have struck back in Brexit, and the G20 and our Prime Minister and Obama at the United Nations has said, we have to have a liberal international economic order, but it has to look after people who are bypassed, inclusive. Now we have a second one, perhaps. It's a major one, and you just had an excellent conversation on refugees. Refugees, the movement of people, are now front and center in world politics, and I think that's worth underlining. And where does it come from? Well, all over. They've been on the move. But Syria is the epicenter of world politics. That's a bold statement. We've got North Korea. We've got the South China Sea. Lots of happening. And an election in the U.S. But right now, in terms of geopolitics, the Syrian case is a humanitarian crisis of the first order. I mean, this is a humanitarian catastrophe, but it's also a geopolitical case study almost of what world politics is about, and it circles back to crystallizing on, hey, it's people. So the big picture then, just to remind us about Syria. Syria is one of those states that got caught up in the Arab Spring. As you know, there was a revolt all across the Arab world about the artificial states that were created after the end of the First World War, Sykes-Picot, and states that are held together by strong men, and they're always men, and they're authoritarian, and they wipe out the soft middle, the civil society that could support a modern state, and then those societies fall back on tribes and clans instead. Now, with the Arab Spring, a lot of those were being swept away. Syria was one of those. There was a peaceful uprising, a demonstration 6 years ago now almost. Yeah. This war in Syria, which started when that peaceful uprising was put down by their own government with great ferocity, it's gone on longer than, World War I. And all these people killed. Well, what happened then? It morphed into a civil war, and a multiple civil war at that. We had a Sunni-Shia split. So it was proxy wars on Syrian soil. Sunni and Shia, that's Iran stepped in a big way. Then Saudi Arabia and its allies stepped in a big way on the other side. And then we have the big powers, the U.S. and Russia are now stepping in a big way.
And there was evidence of that yesterday, right?
Indeed.
With the United States blaming Russia for this attack on a medical facility. Yes. That killed some aid workers yesterday. So it's pitted the United States against Russia once again.
And yet, where are we? These world powers have said not too long ago, look, we have to work together. So the name of the game right now was supposed to be this. This war has gone on too long. There's been lots of efforts at peace talks. They've collapsed over and over. Now the two big powers will get together and sort it out. They'll deliver their sides, their allies. U.S. will ask Saudi Arabia to deliver the Islamic groups, and Russia will deliver both the Iranian government and the Syrian government. And the two big boys on the block will now get together and settle this. And then, in 7 days, there was supposed to be finally a humanitarian ceasefire. not even a ceasefire, reduction of violence. They can't even get to a ceasefire. Then the U.S. and Russia were supposed to set up a coordinating committee to work together on actually fighting ISIS.
Yeah.
So the collapse of the Syrian state has led to the rise of ISIS and the flow of refugees out, and then the overflow from Turkey into the EU, and then the Brexit vote. So immigration and refugees becomes a huge issue unsettling the EU. That 7-day ceasefire, lowering of violence, that peace plan didn't work. And that was supposed to, in turn, to revive the bigger peace plan where all the sides were going to get together and they were going to have actual peace conferences, talks together, and that was supposed to lead to a transitional government, leading to an election which might ease out al-Assad. So the whole key to all this is what to do about al-Assad. We are nowhere near there yet. The collapse of this most recent ceasefire shows that the war in Syria goes on.
And of course, it was a big topic of discussion yesterday at the United Nations, and there was also the dynamic of our Prime Minister being there and speaking
Indeed.
to the UN for the first time at a General Assembly in that capacity,
Yes.
and reiterating Canada's here to help. And he didn't say Canada is back in those words, but that was still the message from our government. And I always find these UN assemblies interesting in the modern era because it's a very old-fashioned phenomenon to have everybody travel to New York City and actually go to the UN building and give these speeches one after the other. Barack Obama spoke yesterday, Theresa May, other world leaders as well. And I just wonder what the UN represents now in the modern world and how that was reflected yesterday.
Well, the United Nations is the only universal membership organization of states, and it follows after the failure of the first effort, the League of Nations. So there's two parts to it, the Security Council, which has two parts, the Big Five, the permanent members, and then the 10 rotating, and we want back on that because, indeed, what does the UN represent today? Clearly, it does not represent the hope of the future as was intended. The notion was these five big powers, permanent members, would get along and guide world politics. Its goal is to maintain world peace. And the talk shop of the world is the General Assembly, and it passes lots of resolutions, some of them binding, most of them not binding. So it was supposed to be the hope of the world. That hope has diminished for the UN. For those of us who have always been supporters of the whole idea, it's been very dispiriting, Mark, to see the decline of the United Nations. And one of the agencies, the Human Rights Commission, is one of the main reasons it's supposed to look after human rights abuses, and it's full of human rights violators, which kind of weakens the whole process. So, yes, I'm very pleased in a way that Canada's back without saying over and over again, Canada's back.
Because that gets a bit much, right?
People were starting to call it smarmy.
Yeah.
But the important thing on this, the topics we're talking about today is two things, really. One is that refugees were the focus. There was a workshop on refugees. Then there was an actual leaders' summit on refugees. Well, Canada co-chaired that workshop with the Queen of Jordan. And now Canada is a co-sponsor with President Obama of that leaders' summit. They are recognizing that in terms of geopolitics, refugees and migrants are kind of the topic of the day. So it's good that the United Nations is bringing that to attention. They're passing resolutions unanimously on the subject. It puts refugees and the movement of people at the center of geopolitics where it belongs because of the things we've been talking about.
We'll have more with Elliot Spitzer coming up in just a few minutes, including the fact that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are going to share the same stage on Monday night. Everyone will be watching that first presidential debate. We'll talk more about that coming up on Ottawa Today.
You're listening to Ottawa Today. Mark will be right back.
was reflecting on just how long the presidential campaign is. Elliot Tepper is here from Carleton University, and it's amazing, really. There's 48 days left in the campaign.
Yes.
And 48 very important days.
Yeah,
obviously, this is
day.
really, every one of them will be important, especially next Monday when there's a debate. But I was thinking about the fact that if you are not a senator or a governor who's currently being paid a salary,
Yes.
You're just somebody who's from the outside who wants to run for president, you have to be independently wealthy. How could you afford to basically devote 2 years of your life to this? This is how long an election is in the United States. So it's easy for someone who's a senator. And in the United States, they don't seem to care. You can be the governor of Ohio or New Jersey. You can run for president and basically leave behind your state. And then if you lose somewhere along the way, you just go back to your job and nobody thinks twice about it. I'm not sure that would be the case in Canada. But it is just such a crazy, long endeavor.
I think probably the re-election of the next president begins 100 days after the inauguration. So the next election cycle starts almost immediately. Oh, it's a complex system, and it's fun to watch. But we know how serious it is.
Yeah.
The U.S. is electing the leader of the free world, in a sense. That's what they say. We're commander-in-chief, the most powerful military force in history, and the U.S. will continue to be the dominant conventional military force, but we are in a changing world. Canada has to find its way where the geopolitics of the world are changing, and we have as much or more vested in who gets this than anybody else, given, we're the neighbor, and that's our major trading partner and cultural mixing up and so forth. Well, where are we in this? You check every day almost. Mm-hmm. Why don't we go? What are the odds today, Mark?
538.com says the odds are 57% that Hillary Clinton will win, 43% Donald Trump.
And where were they before?
Yeah, a month ago. This wasn't the all-time high. Clinton got as high as 89% at one point, but just a month ago, on August the 21st, it was 85-15. So the gap was 70 points. Now the gap is 14 points.
Well, it's beyond that
the odds. These are not poll results. These are the odds of each of them winning. Yeah.
The poll results, which are variable, and we've talked about this, standing back from the ups and downs in the polls, there's a few things to watch for. This is a change election. But I think one of the interesting things right now is at this juncture, the wind is in the sails of Donald Trump. And the issues are moving in his direction. So we've had a situation where I think he was like at 11%, you're right, at one point. But he was at 50-50 right after his convention.
Yeah.
So the polls are moving fast. The battleground states are tightening. The path to an electoral victory is still with Hillary Clinton, but narrowing. This election can go either way, and what we have coming is the debate, which could be that game changer. But look at the issues now. He's going to emphasize a few things, and that's the things to watch for. Strength versus weakness. He is going to make, his physical bulk, 235 pounds or something. Mm-hmm. He's going to be using strength versus weakness as a key theme. He's going to be using change, time for a change. We need an earthquake in Washington versus the status quo candidate. And that's very powerful, time for a change. And we also...
worked 8 years ago, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. And watch for this, the expectations game. Between now and Monday, both sides are likely to start saying, well, here's what to expect. The other side is so strong, and we come in as an underdog, but we'll do our best even though. So the expectations are very low for Donald Trump. Basically, all he has to do is show up and not blow up, and he's presidential. Whereas Hillary Clinton has to show that she can go toe-to-toe with, not a seasoned debater, but somebody who blew away the competition in every debate he ever held, even though he's an outsider.
And that's a part of the dynamic with Donald Trump is that whenever there are these moments, because he seemed like such an unlikely candidate, when he goes down to Mexico and shares a stage with the president there, when he participates in a debate, all these things lend legitimacy to what many people thought was an impossible campaign. So in comparison to expectations, he always seems to be outperforming, even though he hasn't run a particularly solid campaign.
No, but again, the issues, I mean, we've talked about this. Everybody talks about this. He shouldn't be a candidate at all. He shouldn't be in contention at all, given all of the things he's done and said. But the center stage right now, going back to our opening comment, is being taken on terrorism and on immigration. And these are Donald Trump's issues. They're not Hillary Clinton's issues. So right now, the terror attacks feed into his base, and nobody, did I know what Skittles were? But suddenly his son...
I knew what Skittles were.
Well, I thought they were M&Ms, but it depends on your childhood. But we have a situation where a candidate can play on the fears rather than the hopes, and she's fighting a losing game in that regard.
Yeah. Do you think the attacks over the weekend in New York and New Jersey, does that help Donald Trump with his message?
It certainly brings his issue from the back burner to the front burner, and it pushes her issues, whatever those may be, and we know what those are. He's dangerous. You can't let him near the button. He's unpredictable. He's unreliable. He's actually a little nuts, they say, but they don't put it out that way quite. But they imply it all the time. So her issues are not in the ascendancy. His issues are in ascendancy, and those go back to immigration, fear of the other. One of the things I hope that everybody is doing, at least that I'm doing, is watching President Obama and his farewell laps, watching one of the great orators of our political era say things. And he's basically taking on Donald Trump on all the issues. You can't live, he says at the United Nations, you can't live behind walls in an interconnected world. Well, and by the way, our prime minister said much the same thing. So we have a situation where Donald Trump has the messages of the minute going into a very crucial debate. That debate, we've talked about this, if it comes out to be a wash, and remember, he benefits from low expectations.
Yeah.
If it comes out to be kind of even, nobody wins, nobody loses, well, then we're back to where we were just now. She still got the lead in the electoral count and the odds, but barely, and it's closing.
What will you be watching for in the debate?
Well, I'll be watching every minute. I'll be watching the reactions. How do you handle a Donald Trump? Has she solved the problem of how you handle Donald Trump? That's what I'm going to mainly be watching for, because she can't keep saying, as she needs, as her campaign manager said today, fact-checking. It's hard to do that on camera.
Yeah.
Now, Donald, here's a suggestion. She should go back to Ronald Reagan's successful debates. There he goes again. If she can get that attitude going, oh, Donald, you know that's a lie. If she can get that attitude, it's a win. But if she keeps saying, no, then she's on the defensive, he's on the offensive. It's going to be a fascinating battle of strategies, of personalities. Can she get under his skin and make him blow up? Well, would that actually hurt? Maybe that shows strength. What if he makes her cry? Oh, I don't think that'll happen. But if she looks weak and he looks strong, so we'll have to see. And of course, it isn't what you and I see. It's what happens 3 days later when the general public has watched this. And by the way, that's about when we're back on air.
Yeah.
So how has this gone down in terms of the general public? And moving forward, there's 2 more debates. Plus, there's don't forget this, vice presidential debate, coming back to refugees as an issue. Pence, as governor of Indiana, issued an executive order barring any Syrian refugees from entering the state of Indiana. It was overturned by the courts. So there's going to be a very lively second card as well.
Look forward to hearing your comments about the debate next week. Elliot, thank you.